Yeah, and I think the whole ownership of football is messed up because it's grown from a time that now doesn't exist and it hasn't adapted with it. First thing we're doing some assertiveness classes, and I thought, got me wrong. I think you'll find I'm one of the most assertive people you'll meet. And she said, no, Carol, you're one of the most aggressive. You're not assertive at all. There's a bit of a quip at the end, I said. And if you take nothing else from this conference, take never buy a football club. Just don't do it. And somebody came to me a couple of days within the conference club, came to me and said, it was really interesting, that you wish you hadn't bought a football club. And I said, no, I didn't say that. Well, you said that you wish you hadn't bought it. I said, no, I didn't say that. I said, what I said was I wouldn't wish it upon you. Because you have to be a certain sort of crazy to buy a football club.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Founder Favorites. Today, what are we going to talk about, Emmanuel?
We're talking about a lot of things.
I think we're going to talk about football a bit.
Which you know nothing about.
Yeah, I don't know anything about. So if I go a little quiet, it's because Emmanuel's going to take the wheel.
To be fair, I'm not,
I'm learning.
I'm not the biggest football expert, but
yeah,
I know more than you.
Well, right, because we call it soccer, but I'm a big fan of American
See, I used
football.
to call it soccer until I moved here, and everyone bullied me for it.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking.
I just call it American football now, or NFL. I just go, do my specifics.
NFL.
Yeah.
But we're talking about actual football, real football,
right?
Soccer.
Port
football.
Vale, actually, to be frank.
Yeah, we're speaking to the chair.
The owner actually, yes,
of Port Vale Football Club.
Right. So our guest today is actually a pretty interesting one. Her name is Carol Shanahan. She started a really, really, really early fintech in 1992.
Before fintech was even
Before fintech was coined. I mean, even I swear 10 years ago, people would have been like, really, what's fintech? So it's really been modernized lately over the past decade. But she's got quite an interesting story, having started her first job at the age of 17, in a company that was all male. And she's kind of just dominated the world ever since. I mean, she went on to start that tech company in 1992, and that has since grown. It's called Synectics Solutions, with a C in the middle of it. And now she owns Port Vale Football Club. So she's actually got such a story to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, she also has a charity, the Hub Foundation that she started. And I think, I saw a headline where they delivered their 1 millionth meal this past summer or something, which is amazing.
Yeah, she's got her hands in everything, really. So.
Yeah, I mean, what were you doing at 17, Jenny?
Right. It's a good question. I probably had just started driving for a year, trying to pass high school.
Yeah, see, she was taking on taking on the corporate
probably
world at 17.
Trying to apply to universities, getting really nervous and paying that application fee that I don't miss doing.
At 17,
it's paying to apply for a job.
I was still pissing off my parents at 17. You were actually doing some real.
I was really trying to get out of there.
Yeah, you were trying to get out of there. I was still,
trying
to get my curfew time
at 17.
Yeah, I had strict parents.
What time was it?
Don't look at me like I'm I'm some special case. You look at me like I was dying. You're like, oh my goodness. That was years ago. At 17, I still had a curfew bite me. I had strict parents.
What time was it at?
I think my curfew was 9, 10 p.m.
Change on the weekends?
No.
It was always done.
So basically, there was a lot of lying.
Got it. So you forced yourself at the curfew.
Yeah. So no, I mean, I would just lie about a sleepover or I'm stuck in traffic.
Well, that's what you do if you have a curfew.
Yeah. So I had no choice but to lie. So, but I had the good thing is I had this one friend who had really, really, really cool parents. So what we would do is I would just lie that I was I was staying at his place, and the both of us would go out doing mischievous things.
See, I was the one with the cool parents.
You see, I wish I had cool parents.
Yeah. But you do have cool parents. Take that back.
No, my parents are cool in their own way, but not letting, but I had a curfew at 17.
Yeah.
I had a curfew until I went to uni.
Was that 18?
I went to uni at 19.
Right. So you had a curfew when you were an adult.
Yeah, pretty much.
Brilliant.
So I had a curfew as an adult. I did a gap year and I was working, earning my own living. So I was making my own money and I still had a curfew. While I was working, I was literally working part-time. I was working 25 hours or 25 hours a week.
Right, I respect it. Fair enough.
Still had a curfew. I wasn't asking my parents for money anymore, but because I was living under their roof, not paying any bills in their house, I had to abide by their rules.
Yeah, to be fair, that's the way it goes. I mean, honestly, it was either that, you have a curfew. I was paying $50 every university application at the age of 17, and Carol was starting a pretty kick-ass journey.
I wish I was doing what she was doing.
Yeah.
I wish I, at 17, I just, took that. I'm going to take on the corporate world.
I feel like every time we do these podcasts, we not necessarily regret our university degrees, but we do question them.
Yeah, she doesn't have a degree, does she?
Nah.
Yeah, Carol doesn't have a degree.
We question them often. I love them, don't get me wrong. But yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation, and I'm really excited about it. Yeah,
I mean, I'm excited for her to sit down and talk with us. We should probably call her in as soon as we can.
Cool. Carol, thank you so much for joining us. We are here to talk a little bit about your journey with your business, Synectics Solutions, and also your football club, Port Vale, I think it is called. Yeah. So there's a lot to talk about today, but I think we should start with what led you into your industry and what led you to creating Synectics Solutions in the first place.
I've always worked in that area. Before it was fintech, before it was IT, and it was called computers. And when I was 17, my first job was as a computer operator on a mainframe. And I was the first woman to be employed by this company. And I loved it. And then I started to do programming. And then I started to work for a company that did data prep. And I worked in the Birmingham office, and that's where I met Kevin, my husband. About this time I was 21. And we worked together on the British Leyland account. We were in the large accounts department, and we worked on British Leyland. And at that time, British Leyland was huge across the country. And we had a very clear way of how we felt business should be done, and it should be about people. So it's about your customer. It isn't, your customer isn't British Leyland, it is Tony and Martin and whoever else, and that you're dealing with them and that they are also doing a job as well as you're doing your job. So it's really important that when you're selling them something, that you're kind of helping them along their journey as well. And so we built this up, and we got to a point where we left that company and both went and did other jobs. And then we got married, had children, and Kevin was working for a company called Teneda, which sold huge databases. I mean, enormous. They now, are smaller than would fit on a phone. But in those days, it was, a whole room. And it changed the way things like Walmart in the States did business, because they could access their data and how much they'd sold very, very quickly. And it was announced on the 2nd of December 1991, I remember it clearly, that NCR, the National Cash Register, as was called, that do the ATMs, they had bought Teneda. And I said to Kevin, you won't last a week, because I'd worked for NCR in the 80s selling. And the hardest part for them was to get them to accept the business, because they were really risk averse. And Kevin sells by asking for forgiveness, not permission. It's always, well, I've sold it now, can we do it? Or we're going to do it. And so I said, you won't last a week. And he said, no, I agree. And so we said, what are you going to do? And he said, no, I really believe in this product. And I really believe that large databases are the way of the future. That is what's going to happen. He said, so I'd like us to have our own business, and I'd like us to have a Teneda. And I said, they're £1 million, start. I said, no.
And we have to sell everything we own.
And this is £1992 million. That's not even a now £1 million. And but he'd sold one to Rover Cars, because British Leyland had now become Rover Cars. And he went to the strategic IT director and said, look, this is what we want to do. And he wrote a paper to go to the main board and said, look, this is a startup company, I think we should support them. And he gave us a contract for 6 months with no deliverables, which was phenomenal. I mean, now I look back and, you look at how companies start, they need that seed funding, they need that sort of belief in somebody has in them. Rover Cars didn't have a marketing database. I mean, we're back to, this is a history lesson, So Rover Cars didn't have a marketing database, and they wanted one because they wanted to know more about their customers. And so they asked us if we would develop one using their Teneda So we could do that remotely. So we did actually get to use a Teradata from day one. It's just that our PC was hooked into their mainframe. And we did that, and we developed their marketing database. We then ended up supporting that, and we supported it until Rover cars were no more, and then we were running Land Rovers, and we ran that till Tata took them over, and it's not that many years ago that we actually stopped doing that. So that was our first thing. And we had a point about 2 years in where Rover was 80% of our turnover. And we said, this isn't good. There's too much risk in one place. And so our aim was to turn it to being 20% of our turnover whilst growing it. So, it isn't 20% by diminishing it. It's 20% by growing it, but building the rest quicker.
Expanding your other.
And expanding the other, but keeping this in mind. And NCR reappears because the Audit Commission, which was a government body which doesn't exist anymore, but they were there to audit local government. They had got a theory that there was a fraud going on in London, which they called the tube fraud, which is where people were claiming a student grant in one London borough. And if you had a student grant, I mean, this really is a history lesson because there's no such thing as a student grant anymore. But if you had a student grant, you couldn't claim things like housing benefit. And what people were doing was in one London borough, they were claiming a student grant and then going to another London borough where they lived and claiming a housing benefit. And there was no way of being able to track this because the two London boroughs didn't speak to each other data-wise. And so this is the first sort of soiree into data sharing. And so they asked NCR, would they run a pilot on 6 or 7 London boroughs to see if it did exist. They didn't want to do it, so they asked us if we would do it, which we did, and there was a lot of fraud. And so then we did the next one with all of the London boroughs, and that then became the National Fraud Initiative, which then had an Act of Parliament so that all of the local authorities have to submit their data. And now it doesn't just look for one fraud, it looks for fraud all over. And that we grew and we grew and we grew. And we outlived the Audit Commission. They were disbanded. So then we thought, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to us? But the head of the Audit Commission that night on the PM programme said, look, the Audit Commission's got a lot wrong, but it's also got a lot right. And that will still carry on. Things like the National Fraud Initiative is a real success. That will carry on. And there's me and Kevin in the car on the A5 that night going, yes! It was literally, that is our business, because that now was about 80% of our business. And so we entered the fraud world then, on the right side of it, I hasten to add. And we grew. And you look at things that have changed from those days. Data security was nothing. I remember somebody coming from the Audit Commission one day and said, would you mind putting the data in a cupboard? We went, oh, yeah. Can we have a lock? Yeah, we'll have a lock. But this was right then when it really didn't exist. Nobody saw the value in data, or very few saw the value in data. And whether it's Land Rover beginning to see marketing databases are an important element of your business model, or whether there is fraud, so whether it's looking for a very positive thing or a negative thing, and having that access to that data, but data sharing, and that was the big thing that we did, was started to work with sharing the data. And then going back to CMC, where we built this working with people whole area up. And this is before people-based was a thing. We just automatically did it. We were then approached. Experian, that you'll all have heard of, Experian have a product called Hunter. And Hunter shares data from different financial institutions to share frauds. People won't share business, that won't share sales, but they'll share frauds. And this was developed by a small company in the north called MCL. And they developed this product, and they really had the monopoly on it. And the banks and the building societies didn't mind them having a monopoly on it. But when it became that it had been bought by Experian, it was then, no, hang on, you're too big a player to have a monopoly because you have too much power. And so they came to us and said, would you develop an alternative offering? Right. They said, we have no clients for you. We have no money for you. We have no guarantee it's going to work, but we'd really like you to do it. Now,
risk.
I mean,
how much would that have cost you at the time to set up on that venture without any backing? Because they said they had no money for you to even go forward with this.
And it's very hard to say because it was using staff. So it was using resource that we had. Now, what we had was, because the National Fraud Initiative had a 2-year cycle, so it had a peak and a trough. So when you got to the trough, you had a lot of spare resource that you really needed to give them something to do. And so we were able to use it from that perspective. But I remember the person who was the main developer there, he was getting really upset because I'm doing all this work, we're not bringing any money in. I kept saying, we will. Yeah, but I'm doing this, we're still not bringing any money in. We will. And now it's our biggest product, so it did grow. And I said at the time, this isn't betting the farm on this. This is betting the farm, the animals, the crops, the kids. This is betting the lot. So that decision to go and develop Curay, we call it, was the biggest decision that we have taken. And so people say to me, buying a football club, isn't that a big risk? It's not the biggest risk, because the biggest risk, if I look through my journey, would actually have been the risk to start developing Curay.
And what is it like, taking these big risks? Like, how do you know it's worth taking? I feel like that's a kind of that's a problem a lot of people have, whether they're entrepreneurs who don't know if they want to quit their day job to start a business, or like business owners who have two big decisions that they have to make, A or B. Which one should I take? How do you know it's the right decision, or is it that you just don't know and it's almost like a blind leap of faith?
But you also mentioned that, at the time of, starting is, nobody really knew the value of data. So you had to have somehow felt like there would be a value someday.
Yes.
So how do you kind of look past that and take that risk?
Okay. The risk for me is you go and ask everybody that you can for their opinion, particularly, and I'm going to go back to the football club for a minute. When I was going to buy the football club, I went into the meeting with the solicitors, and there was 6 lawyers and 3 accountants, and they went round the room going, you can't do this, Carol. We cannot let you do this deal. This is a terrible deal. This is an absolutely awful deal. We cannot let you do this deal. Tell me why. So they told me all the reasons why. They were right. It was a terrible deal. But
6 weeks later, you buy the club anyway.
No, yeah. Because what I did at the end of it, I listened to them all, and this has been my advice. Listen to them all. I took on what they said, and then I said, okay, you are my advisors, and I pay you handsomely to do so, and I listen and I'll take it in. And I've heard what you've said. I'm now going to go and ask Di on reception. It was their office, it wasn't even my office, and I'm lording it about. And I said, I'm now going to go and ask Di on reception to make us all a drink. And when I come back, you are going to tell me how we do this deal in 6 weeks, because that's all we've got.
I got the exact number right. I said 6 weeks
later.
later.
Wait, how did you know that?
No, I didn't.
But it was right.
I noticed you saying 6 weeks. I was like, I don't know if he knows that.
You were spot on right there. and then I went out and I just went, wow, what have I just done? Because you do it, and you do it because it feels right. You can't be cowed by the fact that somebody is a lawyer or somebody is an accountant. But you can't ride roughshod either. You respect the information, and you respect their education within that area and their knowledge. And then you bring it into your own situation and say, how does it fit? And they were right. It was a terrible deal. Nobody who buys a football club can hold their head up in the business community and say, I've just done a great deal. You haven't, because it isn't. As long as you know that, so you know the risk. The only thing I hate is not knowing a risk. So we've just employed new solicitors for Port Vale to just go through everything. And I've said to them, I don't mind the risk that I have. I just want to know it. You don't want to be sat there not knowing what's around the corner or what can come.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the start of your career when you were 17 and, your first job, what was it like? Because you said you're the first woman the company hired. What was that like, working in that industry, working at that company, being the only woman at the company?
And to now own your own business.
And now to own your own business. Like,
well, this was the thing, because I didn't have any qualifications. at all. School, I had 6 abortive attempts at education through my childhood. None of them worked. And I now have 1 O-level. I eventually got an O-level. I've got 1 O-level, 2 honorary doctorates and an OBE, and that's my full lot. And at that point, I was 17, and I had a friend who worked in an employment recruitment place called Brook Street Bureau. And I went in there and I'm sat at her desk and she's going through this Rolodex of all these jobs. And she's looking at me and then she's looking at me. No. And in the end I went, stop, enough. Come on, there has to be a job I can do. What's the next job? And she said, there's this mainframe computer operator for this company, big company. And I said, yeah, I fancy that. My mum does computers at her work. I can do that. And I like maths. And she says, you can't, Carol, because they want 5 O-levels, 2 A-levels, experience, driver, and a man, because at that point they could say. And I said, yeah. She said, you've got no O-levels and A-levels, you can't drive, you've got no experience, and you're a woman. And I went, yeah, get me an interview. So she got me this interview, and off I charged with this interview, this 17-year-old, I can do this, with a real attitude. And I'm in this 2-hour interview, and it's shift work, so, it's night shift and everything. And they asked me this ridiculous question, because he said, everybody else, they're all men. And I said, yeah, I get that. And he said, well, what would you do if it was 1 o'clock in the morning and one of the men made a pass at you? And I said, what difference would the time make? I mean, why at 1 o'clock in the morning?
Would I change my reaction?
Just wait till 2. It was such a ridiculous thing. And even as a 17-year-old, I was, no, this makes no sense. And then he said, he called me back for a second interview with his regional manager. And after about 10 minutes, this manager turns around to the first chap and he said, I'm with you. I've no idea why, but you've got to give her a go. And so they gave me this job. And I went in and I tried to begin with to do what a lot of women do when they go into a man's world. I tried to outman the men. I can be more of a man than you. I can drink more Guinness, smoke more fags, swear more, make ruder jokes, carry more boxes of paper. I can do anything that you guys can do. I'm just as good. And then I got so far, and then I thought, you don't need to do this. Actually, you can just be yourself. And then I started to knock that back, and then I started to be actually seeing the power of being a woman and of being who I am, rather than trying to fit in by being something that I'm not. So that was a big lesson, and one that came back when I bought Port Vale, because that is very much a man's world. Mm-hmm. And then you go in there, and it's quite funny because, you'll have the players around there, and I stay on a Friday night quite often when we're playing away on a Saturday. And they'll say something at dinner, and they'll say something a bit, coarse or a bit crude. Then they'll go, oh, Carol, then I'll come out with something that's even worse. And then they'll go, oh.
I can match your slander.
Yeah. Where did that come from?
Smoke more fags, drink more Guinness.
Yeah. I got that in my locker. You can't out-curse me.
Yeah. So what is it, Carol, though, about football? I mean, have you always had a knack for football, or why did you want to buy the football club in the first place?
When I was... This isn't an X Factor sub-story, I promise you, and it ends well. Born in Lincolnshire, my mum left when I was 6, so this was sort of 1963. And when I was 8, I went to live with her. She'd moved to London, but then she moved to West Bromwich, which is where her family had come from. And so she went to West Bromwich, and she got a job as a doctor's receptionist, secretary. And we lived on the top floor of this doctor's house, and he was the doctor for the West Bromwich Albion, one of the doctors for there, and we lived just down the road from the Albion. And so as a 10-year-old girl, I would just go and wander down the Birmingham Road and go into, and I predate the M5. The M5 wasn't there, so it was quite an easy walk straight down. And then I would just go in the Brummie Road end. I never went in the, the family area or anywhere.
I lived in Birmingham actually for a year.
Did you? Whereabouts?
Like right next to New Street.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Burnley Hen, like Brindley Place.
Yeah, no,
Brindley
Brindley Place.
and New Street. Yeah, that's where I used to live.
Well, Kevin and I met at the end at Five Ways, Edgbaston.
Okay, I know. Yeah,
yeah.
Wow.
That's where
I passed
we met.
it. My old workplace was like right next to there.
Yeah.
Cobalt Square.
Yeah.
So it's like
I know exactly where you mean.
Right next to it, and across from it now there's like a Morrison's. I don't know if it was.
Oh, it's gone a lot posher now than that. So I've lost my track now. So where am I?
Playing football, I think that was.
Oh yeah, sorry. So I'd go and watch the football, and I was a daddy's girl. When I look back, I was a real daddy's girl, and my dad lived 120 miles away, and he would come and get me for the holidays. But if you wanted to speak to him, you had to walk down to a red telephone box and phone him, and he only had a phone at work. So and then I was at school, and so I never spoke to him as much as I wanted. It's not like now where you've got like this full communication with people, and I didn't think this at the time, but when I look back, I think that was my connection with my dad. When I was in the Brummie Road end, and some bloke would pick me up and put me on one of the barriers because there were no seats. Put me on something so I could see. And they won the FA Cup in '68, and Jeff Astle scored. Header, left-hand side the box, first minute of extra time against Everton. So you don't forget these things. They become part of you. They become part of your DNA. But then when I moved, I'm not a lifelong West Bromwich Albion supporter, but I certainly was in those days. And then when we going forward to having Synectics, and we got 360 staff. We're in Stoke-on-Trent, and we had 3 offices, and everybody had to walk from one office to the other, and it didn't really work. And our culture worked by being together and about feeding people. I've always had tea ladies. And I've never had a man in the job, which is why they're called tea ladies. It's nothing. If there was a man would want to come and do it, he's very, very welcome. So we have tea ladies. We feed everybody. So even with the football club now, at 12:30, the whole club stops. And we all go upstairs to the main hospitality area, and we all eat together. And I think that's really, really important. But we had these 360 staff, and we wanted to bring them all together into one office so we could keep this culture and grow the culture. And the office that was found was an old co-op supermarket, which had then become the co-op's travel headquarters. So they had turned it into a beautiful office. And it was next door to Port Vale. It just happened to be next door to Vale Park. And so we went. Now, we'd been in quite a nice area up there where the 3 offices were. And we did some charity work, but we didn't really do anything else because there was nothing else really that entered our consciousness that really needed doing. When you get to Burslem, north of Stoke, that is an area of such deprivation as to be untrue. And you go in there and you think, my goodness, this area needs help. It's lost all of its industry. And this whole area of post-industrial places within the UK, and how do we look after them and what do we do for them, I think is a conversation that we haven't really had, and people have suffered because of it. But a lot of those post-industrial places, like in Birmingham, like in Bradford, in Stoke, have really successful football clubs because that's always been part of that industrial landscape. And so that area had lost the pottery companies, they'd lost the mines, they'd lost the steelworks, and had nothing. And I started to do a lot of community work, and I started to do this holiday hunger, and I hate the term, but it is about kids during holiday periods of giving them food and activities, and really to see how quickly they can re-enter education at September, how far, so that they haven't slipped back. And I said to Kevin in the end, and I also started to go to the Port Vale because we had an issue with the car park, and my previous owner was not committed to the club, let's put it that way. But the first day I went, and I remember we were going into the railway paddock, which is kind of the Brummie Road end, equivalent. And I remember standing there with my friend who's a Vale fan, and some of the people who work for me at Synectics are Vale fans. And they said, "Where are you going, Carol?" And I said, "I'm going in there." "You can't go in there." "Why?" "That's where the lads go." I said, well, I'm going where the lads go then, aren't I? But I'm going in there. And I love where the lads go. And I went in and I was back. I was back to that sense of belonging, that sense of community, that sense of place. You know, it's such a social leveller. It doesn't matter who you are. When you're on the terraces, you can be a king, you can be a pauper, you can be anybody. But at that point, you're a Vale fan, you're a Arsenal fan, you're a City fan, whatever you are. But you have that commonality, you have that social level. And I love that about it. And so I started to do more work in the community. I became chair of Port Vale Foundation Trust, and the owner really wanted to get out, and we tried to buy the club off him before and it hadn't really worked, and we'd pulled back, and then he just said that he went on the radio after a match and said, if it isn't sold, if she hasn't bought it by the end of the season, I'm putting it into administration. And he was the only creditor, so we knew that it would then go into liquidation. And I remember we were at a Cheltenham away match, and we sat with quite a lot of the fans behind the goal. And I said, look, if there's anything we can do to help in the background, anything we can do to help, let us know. And as we were leaving, there was a whole group of Vale fans, and they said, look, we really, really would like you to buy it. It was a little bit like the Syrah thing again, you know, we really want you to buy it. There's nothing in it, you know. There's
big risk, we have nothing. It's going to go
exactly, you know, this recurring theme. Driving home, I said to Kevin, I think we've got to do this. He says, yeah, I think you're right. Because my thing was, if we really, really wanted to help Burslem, we'd go and make Port Vale successful. And Kevin said, how? I said, I haven't got a clue. What do we know about running a football club? And then it's looking then for, well, we can run an IT company, so why can't we run a football club?
Like, what's the main difference running Synectics solution and running Port Vale? Like, what's the big difference?
Public scrutiny and expectation.
Right, that was a quick answer.
The fans, right? I'm sure the fans are...
Yeah, no, it's the fans. It is. Because who owns... Synectics was started by Kevin and myself. No one would ever question who owned Synectics.
Right.
Whereas a football club, it is who owns it. So spiritually, it's owned by the fans. Mm-hmm. You know, when I talk about, my youngest daughter did a degree in theological studies, and she says that, football is a faith-based system. And, it's exactly the same as the system she learned on her degree. And it is, because if you went to your first match as with your dad, your uncle, your brother, whoever, when you're very, very young, you become a fan. It becomes part of your fabric. So if you equate it to Catholicism, you become like a cradle Catholic, a cradle Vale fan in this instance. Now you can leave Burslem, you can go and live anywhere in the world. So, but you can only lapse. You can't leave being a Vale fan. Mm. So we have Vale fans all around the world because they've migrated from the Stoke-on-Trent area. And so then, now they would never change anything because it's in their DNA. So if you do anything, it rocks them. And you have to be really conscious of that and respectful of that. But at the same time, they need converts. They need converts like me and Darren, who's my manager now, and different people. Because we come in and go, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? I changed the home end and the away end from behind one goal to behind the other because it made sense in so many areas. But I got a real pushback from a number of people because my dad sat there, my uncle sat there, and I said, well, you can come in the week and you can sit there for as long as you like. That's fine. But on a match day, I really need you to be the other end for all of these logical reasons. But football isn't logical to those people. It's not like. But I've got one who, he thinks I'm the devil incarnate still, because I did that. So, but then there's their expectation of what do they have a right to know. And I think the whole ownership of football is messed up because it's grown from a time that now doesn't exist. And it hasn't adapted with it. So football originally, historically, was owned by local business people, and it was part of the local dignitary, if you like, as part of that local area. And so the community side of it was always really important. And so that's why you get a lot of the, so Everton, if you look at Everton, for an example, really, really prolific community side to it, because that's where its previous owners had really wanted the focus. Now you're getting a lot of American owners or Scandinavian or wherever they're coming from, who now it is a thing to own an English football club.
It's business now.
It's business.
And you're worried about your P&L, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So the ownership has switched from it, being the fans that owned it and local, majority stakeholders, to this Scandinavian who just bought the company out, bought the football club company outright.
And they're changing the matches. No.
Yeah, the goals. But you see, for them, when things don't go well, they haven't got that real purpose to fall back on. So last year, we got relegated last year, and it was terrible. It was a horrible, horrible experience. But our community side was prolific. We were doing so much work there. Our women's team were promoted undefeated in the league. It was a bit like being bipolar. A Saturday was horrendous, because you went to the men's team and, oh my goodness, you came away from it. You couldn't enjoy Strictly. You couldn't do anything because it was so, you just felt so down. And then you go on a Sunday, you'd watch the women and, oh my goodness, it's phenomenal. So it is this multifaceted area. And I think if somebody comes in and they are only buying the men's first team and then anything that supports that, then I think football's really got an issue. Because if football is of the people for the people, then the people have to be in the middle of it. But then you get to a point, well, okay, if I'm putting my own personal money into it, if anybody is putting their own personal money into it, what rights do they have back? So there's this whole debate. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and when you do the introduction at the beginning, you say who you are. And there's a bit of a quip at the end, I said. And if you take nothing else from this conference, never buy a football club. Just don't do it. And somebody came to me a couple of days within the conference, came to me and said, it was really interesting, that you wish you hadn't bought the football club. And I said, no, I didn't say that. Well, you said that you wish you hadn't bought it. I said, no, I didn't say that. I said, what I said was I wouldn't wish it upon you. Because you have to be a certain sort of crazy to buy a football club. And unless you inherently are, then you shouldn't do it. Unless you can do it. So you get somebody like David Clowes, who's at Derby. If you ask him, which I have done, why did you buy Derby County? Because it was going under and somebody had to do it and there was nobody else, so I did it. And that's amazing because he's done it for the city, but he's part of that. And that's why I did it, because somebody had to. But if somebody goes and buys it for a different reason, then it's a whole different ball game. And if you go in there naively, I always say in football, you can't be a goldfish in a sea of sharks, and don't mistake them, they're sharks. It's a really tough industry. It's wonderful, and I'm downplaying it a lot because the highs are really high, but the lows are so low. And you ask, back to Synectics, everything that happens in private. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows. I mean, we've been through some terrible times with Synectics. 12 years ago, we nearly got taken under by GRG, that whole scandal with the Royal Bank of Scotland. Mm-hmm. And they came after us and very nearly took us down. And it was horrendous, absolutely horrendous time. But nobody knew. But so then we contain that. So in another way, that was just as tough because you have to contain it all yourself.
In football, it takes 2 hours and it's all over Reddit.
Yeah.
Every single scandal is all over Reddit.
Somebody asked me about running a football club, and I said, the trouble is, the interesting stuff I can't tell you, and the day-to-day is as boring as dishwater,
But speaking of day-to-day, I mean, where do you spend most of your time? Are you really still involved in Synectics, or do you spend most of your time at the club? I mean, what's...
No, in April of this year, we sold Synectics. To PE.
Okay.
And my daughter and I are non-execs. Mm-hmm. It's been quite a transition for me because by nature, as you can tell, I'm not a natural non-exec. Mm-hmm. I'm not a natural sit back and look and say, oh, that's interesting. Sleeves up, come on, let's go get on with it. So not being an exec is a big transition for me. And also, we've changed Synectics from being the family company to being the family investment. And that's been a big change. When the children, so I've got 4 children, and they're all grown up now. They're not really children, but as they were growing up, they always viewed Synectics as the 5th sibling. Because they always, the 4th sibling, because 4 of them, the 4th sibling, because they always said that, they had to fight it for their parents' attention, and it always had a seat at the dinner table because it was always being talked about. So to them, it was the next sibling. Then Port Vale comes along, and they said, yeah, that was the troubled teenager that
the new exciting one.
Yeah, that gets adopted and robs mother's
really
purse.
Takes
and
the spotlight.
Gets the biggest piece of chicken at the dining table.
Yeah, that's the one. And so to make that decision to sell Synectics was big, but it was the right decision. So I now go to the board meetings. Any help I can give, I will. But I spent my time with just moving into the countryside and buying a farm. And so we're going to go and we're going to buy this farm. It's not a working farm at the moment, and
so another risk.
Another
3. We're at 3.
You don't know when to stop, do you?
Farms, football clubs, and IT companies. It's quite
within a day of saying we're going to buy this farm, my daughter sends me this whole business plan of making it into a non-for-profit working farm, and then getting minibuses and bringing kids from the city that's never seen, animals and what have you, and this is what a day would look like, and this is how we could do school trips, and you think, oh my goodness, when you just said yes, we're going to buy this thing.
I just want space and fresh air.
Yeah, I just want to walk my dogs on my own land. That's all I really want. And then for the football club, and what I really worked on last year was, it's back to the good to great book, where you talk about getting the right people on the bus, but you also talk about getting the very, very best people that you can. And if you're going to splash out on getting your leaders right. And so I ended up getting Darren Moore, who is a far better manager than I could have reasonably expected. For a League One going into a League Two club, he's a championship manager from West Bromwich, from Birmingham. So he's from about a mile and a bit one way from the Albion ground, and I was a mile and a half the other way from the Albion ground. And when I'm having the call with him, because I spoke to our director of football at the time, I said, I want Darren Moore. And he said, Carol, we can't have Darren Moore. We're Port Vale, Darren Moore. And I said, well, we can't get him if we don't speak to him, so go and get him on the phone, So we had this 2 or 3 hour Zoom call. And I was saying to him about being a kid, and I said, I used to go and watch the Albion, and then if they played away, I'd catch the 79 bus and I'd go and watch the Wolves, or I'd catch the 74 bus and I'd go and watch the Villa. And he said to me after he joined, he said, I was telling somebody else, I was listening to him, and he said, and Carol was talking about catching the 79 bus, and I thought, I used to catch the 79 bus and go and watch the Wolves. I said, if I'd have known the 79 bus would have done the deal, I'd have said that at the beginning, I could have saved us 3 hours. But he has the same values, he has the same background as I have in that sort of respect. And so I've got him, I've got a chap called Matt Hancock, and we used to always have to say Matt Hancock, not that one, which was the politician. And so he came to me. He'd done 11 years running the foundation at Burton Albion, and then he's come to me, and he's now my CEO, and he's amazing. So I've got an incredibly good manager, an incredibly good CEO, and I'll let them do their job.
Mm-hmm.
What is your favorite team now?
My favourite team?
Outside of Portdale. Like, what do you, if you watch the Premier League? Maybe the Premier League, for instance. What would you say is your favorite football team in the Premier League?
Well, I was on the train today, and my son was saying that Aston Villa is the one to really watch at the moment.
Aston Villa, they had a big victory yesterday.
Big one last night, didn't they?
Yeah.
So I like teams like Plymouth, where you've got an owner, because it's quite interesting, because when you get to know from the inside, you get to know the owners and what they're looking to do and how they're looking to do it. And I like Simon, who owns Plymouth, and he's been very much about building and growing a football club with the community at the heart. I like Brentford for the same sort of reasons. And so there's lots of clubs that I like, now, but I could only have Port Vale. You cannot put anything on the airways, and I say other than Port Vale, I get lynched.
And since you didn't have like a college degree or anything, you kind of charged into the corporate world head first at 17. Do you think a college degree is still necessary in today's climate?
I've got 4 children, as I said. I've got 2 that have gone to university. One has got a master's in physics and a master's in business finance, and the other one's got a degree in theological studies. I've got 2 who just didn't want to know, just did not want to go for the that's next part of education. And I was fine, you do either. What that gives you is a shorthand. It says that I can go to somewhere for 3 years and stay more or less on the straight and narrow, and I can focus on a subject and I can pass exams. If you're not that sort of person, and I never was until my kids really aren't, you can still be successful because you very often will have compensating characteristics. So I can't do that. Ask me to do a talk with a script, forget it. I just can't do it at all. But ask me to speak on a subject that I know about or I feel passionately about, I can do it, and I can do that without too much concern. And so it's looking at what you can do and how you can do it, and then just having real confidence and faith in yourself. And I think that for me, and trust in yourself, you go back to risk, and as I said, you get all the information around you and then you just go for what feels right. And I've now got this thing with Port Vale that I've got this real clear sense of destiny where I look, I go into Vale and it kind of makes my life make sense. Why did I go and do that as a 10-year-old and go and watch the Albion? Why did I go and get the experiences that I did, go and be a woman in a man's world? All these things have contributed to be as part of my journey for me to be where I am. But then it's having faith in that destiny. We're not always given to know why we're where we are, but we've got to work it out.
Compounding success.
And what was it like leaving school at such a young age with no degree or anything to back you up? What was that like?
Risky.
Well, yeah. But I don't know. I was always a fighter. I still am a fighter, but I'm not the fighter that I was. I remember going to see the very first time I went to see somebody to get some counselling. And after the first session, she said to me, "Oh yeah, I can help you, Carol. First thing we'll do is some assertiveness classes." And I said, "Got me wrong. I think you'll find I'm one of the most assertive people you'll meet." And she said, "No, Carol, you're one of the most aggressive. You're not assertive at all." And it was like a water going over me. I just never considered myself as being aggressive. I just felt myself as doing what I needed to do to get where I needed to go, and that was what put that sense of purpose in there, and I can do it. Whereas sort of starting to be a lot more self-aware. Actually, I don't need to do that. I don't need to be quite so bullshit.
Assertively aggressive.
Yeah.
I think that's a better way to put it as a woman in business.
Yeah.
It's fine when you do what you need to do.
Yeah, it is, because that's the other thing being a woman in business is how do you come across. I'm really big in the masculine and feminine energy in things where I think men suppress their feminine energy. And what I've tried to do in the football club is allow for it to come out and it be okay. I mean, I don't mean on the pitch. You go and do what you got to go do on the pitch. But off the pitch, they're people. They're people. And the football industry does not treat people as people. And that really drives me mad.
Yeah, we're very brutal on how we judge players and the team and the manager and the owners. United is facing a very rough time right now.
It is, and it's based on so little information. I always say it's like looking through a window of a house and judging the whole house. You can't do it because, people judged me last year. They judged how I ran the club. They judged what was going on with the club. They didn't know an awful lot of what was happening, and they couldn't know. And yet they will make an assumption and then act as if it's a fact.
Well, it's like celebrity press as well. When you see like a story of some celebrity in the headlines, you don't really know what happened or how they got there, what happened that night before, that day of, and stuff like that. So
yeah even just how a football player or a celebrity will be walking down, you want a photo with that person, and the celebrity or the player doesn't want to take a picture at the moment. You don't know if he's or she's going through problems at home. They had a bad day.
And now they're just mean and you don't like them.
Now they're awful, and you go online and you say terrible things about them just from that one little interaction without even knowing what's going on in their day.
Well, our biggest celebrity fan is Robbie Williams, and who I've got to know really quite well, because he messages me after virtually every match, or I'll message him with a little bit of what's going on. But earlier this year, he rang me and said that a journalist from a paper had got in touch with him to say that they'd heard that he was buying Port Vale. And he said, no, I'm not. I'm absolutely not. I don't like Port Vale, I love Port Vale, but I am not buying it. It's not for sale, I'm not buying it. And he said, and I've just had a text from them that they're still running the story. And he sent me a copy of the text conversation with these journalists, and they still ran the story, even though he had said categorically that it was not a fact.
But did they ask you?
Not us. We're not like that.
No. I'm not suggesting. I'm not suggesting you are. No, this was the
good thing we don't write about sports. Sports team.
No, this was the. This is about celebrity. So this was, I've got a celebrity story, and if I don't run it, somebody else will.
Right. So I'm assuming they asked them too, and not you, or did they reach out to you as well, saying?
Yes, it wasn't the same people. It wasn't the same people who reached out. I wasn't the story.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So they probably just went to.
Oh no, I'm not the story at all. He was the story. But then, when we were buying this house, I went to look around a house, and this chap was saying, "Oh, Robbie Williams used to come to this house, and he used to do this, and he used to do that." We didn't say that we knew him, so I messaged him later on. I said, "I've been to this house. You used to go. You used to do this. You used to do that." He goes back and says, "Carol, it's more fake news. I've never been there."
I've never seen that place in my
life. And then he used that chair while he drank that coffee out of that mug.
Well, I said to him, the school you went to must have been enormous, because everybody in Stoke-on-Trent went to school with you. Everybody.
Everyone knows Robbie Williams.
Yeah. Every single one.
And you talked about, the charity. And I know you're running like the Hub Foundation.
Yeah.
How was that like? What led you to be so charitable?
I started the Hub Foundation because we weren't going to buy a football club. So we thought, well, we need to do something. We want to do something for the area. So we decided to do that. So that's the food and activities during the school holidays. And then we got involved with the holiday activities and food programme, which now runs out throughout the whole of the country to help kids. When I was 40, I went to a school reunion for the school in Lincolnshire, and all of us went. We were all 40. And I went in and I saw the maths teacher, Mr. Windsor. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I told him about Synectics. And I'd gone in Kevin's car because it was better than mine, and I wanted to show that I was doing okay. And he said, "What do you do?" I told him. He said, "I always knew you'd do well." I said, "You didn't. You described me to the gutter." And he said, "No, you were walking a path, and you were going to fall one way or the other. And whichever way you fell was going to be spectacular. But there was something about you that I thought, no, she will fall the right way." And then that really got to me. And I came back and I thought, how many kids are walking that path that I walked? And how many have the opportunity to fall the way that I fell? And how do I make that opportunity? They don't have to take it. You can't force them to do it. If they want to do it, they're going to do it. If they don't, they won't. But so many of them don't even have the opportunity to do it. And that's what really started to drive me into how do we help kids to be where I was. Because, I look back and people who know me now wouldn't believe the me of 16, 17 would be the same person. And people who knew me at 17 would never believe, other than the maths teacher who had this great faith in me, would never believe that I would end up how I've ended up. And every now and again it sort of overwhelms you a bit and you think, okay, what do we do? What do we do to give kids that opportunity?
Well, there's such a wealth of knowledge and resource in the world, and just not everybody gets that fair access to it. So I think I get, if you go through that experience to have to give back, I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, and I think it's the belief. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we had an awards dinner last week for our foundation, And I hate award dinners, if I'm perfectly honest, in community things. I really hate them because
run to charity.
How do you judge one against another? I always feel that for the poor two who were shortlisted and they came with such hope and they don't win it, I want to do another dinner for the two who didn't do it, didn't get it. But there was one, and he really was going through hard times, and very little belief. In fact, there was two there that very, very little belief in themselves. And then they come and you start to see them as a person, and then you start to show them that you see them as a person. And then they start to see themselves as a person. And then that starts to grow. And we had one, and he started to do a day a week volunteering for us, and then it went to 2 days, and now we employ him. And and you think, wow, that lad. And his dad was saying to me, we just never believed. We never believed that he could get to where he's got. Well, you've got to believe. We've all got to believe. And sometimes we have to pass that belief on. And, and it's a fake it till you make it sometimes, isn't it? But,
That's what we're doing now.
Yeah. It's faking it till you make it.
It's what we're all doing.
Yeah.
It's what we're all doing, really, because we're all faking it to the next level, aren't we? Whatever we're doing, we're always...
That is belief, isn't it? Faking it.
Yeah,
it is. Literally made up.
It'll be all right. Yeah, it'll be all right.
There's a certain percentage of disbelief in believing in yourself, or delusional, being delusional is a big.
You get a word bubble right here with all those words in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
For that.
I guess my final question just kind of be what would be your advice to, entrepreneurs, founders like yourself, 18, 21, 30, 50, who want to start their own company? What would be your advice to them? Fake it till you make it, or
be assertively aggressive, or
understand the difference between being right and winning. Because I see so many people who get so stuck on being right. They've got to be right. And sometimes you've just got to be, okay, that might, it might be, particularly if you're in business. So you've got a client, or whoever you've got, and your client is saying that they want something, or they're saying something was wrong, and it wasn't. And then you've got to look at that, and you can say, right, I can either go and fight them, and I can either go and tell them that they are wrong, but I'm going to lose the client. So how am I going to win? What is winning in this case? Well, winning in this case is I let them win this one, and then I keep a happy client, and then I grow the client. And so sometimes you have to do that. You have to say, we had a client who gave notice to us in Synectics. It was a big client, and they went off to do something else. And I always say, if a client gives notice to you, you treat them as if they're still your client in 5 years' time. You do not change. And even though you want to say, you're wrong, you shouldn't give us notice, you should do this, you should do that, so just treat them as if they are. And give them the space that if they want to, they can come back. And that client came back. And after so long, they came out and they rang me and they said, we've made a terrible mistake. And part of me felt like saying, yeah, I knew that. And then I was
told you.
Told you so.
Well, okay. Well, yeah, of course we've got space. You've got to come back. And so they've come back. They're a bigger client than they were. So we could have gone on and said, got it wrong, but we wouldn't have won. So being right and winning.
And also biting your tongue in that scenario, I guess.
Yeah. And that's why good family comes in, or good colleagues, because you've got to have that outlet.
Right.
You've got to be able to go in that room and go, you've got to let it out.
Yeah.
But just don't let it out to them. Let it out to them.
Yeah. And it's like the scream boxes that like some companies have. You just go in there and you scream it out.
You just scream. And sometimes I'll go into work and I'll just say to Darren or to Matt or to Patrick, my son, I'll just say, could you just go in there? And they'll just go in there and I'll go, and I'll go, thank you very much. And then I walk out. They haven't said a thing. I just need them there, and I need to be able to say it, because don't leave it in. Let it out. Just make sure who you're letting it out to.
So putting your aggression in like a box and then just like leaving it there. And then,
the
assertively aggression and the box as well.
Yeah, and it's also kind of this is about being right and winning. It's knowing which fights do you go and fight? Because there's a few hills you don't want to go and die on. Just let it go. Let it go.
I think we have our headline, knowing which fights to fight.
Yep, definitely. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot in this in this last 45 minutes. But yeah, we are out of time. But we really do appreciate you coming.
It's a pleasure.
Had a brilliant time talking about. I mean, I'm not really a big football fan, but Emmanuel and I have had our chats a few times, so I'm getting there, slowly but surely. But it's come up a few times.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed it.